The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace as tourists gathered behind the metal barriers, cameras ready to capture the famous changing of the guard ceremony. Among the crowd stood Marcus Thompson, a 28-year-old construction worker from Birmingham who had traveled to London for his sister's wedding weekend. What should have been a peaceful tourist attraction would soon become the center of international headlines. The Queen's Guard stood motionless at their posts, their iconic red tunics and bearskin hats drawing admiration from visitors worldwide. These weren't just ceremonial figures dressed for show. They were active-duty soldiers from elite regiments, trained killers who had served in combat zones across the globe. Their stillness was legendary, their discipline absolute, and their tolerance for interference non-existent. Marcus had been drinking since the night before, celebrating his sister's engagement party with friends from his old neighborhood. The alcohol still coursed through his system as he pushed through the crowd, growing increasingly agitated by what he perceived as the pretentious display of royal tradition. His working-class background had always made him resentful of the monarchy, viewing the guards as symbols of an outdated class system that kept ordinary people like him in their place. The tourists around him whispered excitedly in various languages, pointing at the guards and taking selfies. Children pressed their faces against the barriers, wide-eyed with wonder at the spectacle. But Marcus saw something different. He saw men playing dress-up, pretending to be important while real people struggled to pay their bills and find decent work. Guard Samuel Richards had been stationed at his post for 47 minutes without moving a muscle. The 24-year-old soldier from the Welsh Guards had completed 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq before being selected for this prestigious assignment. Behind his stoic expression, he remained acutely aware of every movement in the crowd, every potential threat, every person who stepped too close to the barriers. The morning had started normally enough, the usual mix of respectful tourists, excited children, and the occasional person trying to get a reaction from the guards. Samuel had learned to filter out the noise, the attempts at conversation, the jokes, and the poses people struck while taking photos with him in the background. It was all part of the job, part of serving the crown in one of its most visible roles. But something felt different today. There was a tension in the air, a restlessness among certain members of the crowd that set his trained instincts on edge. Years of combat experience had taught him to recognize the signs of impending trouble, the subtle shifts in body language and vocal patterns that preceded violence. Marcus had been trying to get the attention of various guards for the past 20 minutes, shouting comments about their usefulness, making jokes about their hats, and generally attempting to provoke a response. His friends had grown embarrassed by his behavior and tried to pull him away, but he shrugged them off, becoming more determined with each failed attempt to break the guard's composure. The crowd began to thin as the ceremony approached its conclusion. Most tourists were satisfied with their photos and souvenirs, ready to move on to the next stop on their London adventure. But Marcus remained, his frustration building as the guards continued to ignore his increasingly aggressive taunts. Samuel could hear the man's voice growing louder, more belligerent, more challenging. Through his peripheral vision, he could see the figure getting closer to the barrier, gesturing more wildly, drawing concerned looks from other tourists. The guard's training kicked in automatically. Assess the threat, maintain position, be ready to respond if the situation escalated beyond verbal harassment. The moment that would change everything was approaching rapidly. Marcus had reached a decision that his alcohol-impaired judgment told him would finally get the reaction he wanted. He would show these pompous guards that they weren't untouchable, that ordinary people like him wouldn't be intimidated by their fancy uniforms and rigid discipline. What Marcus didn't understand was that he was about to discover why the Queen's Guard had maintained their reputation for over 350 years. He was about to learn that beneath those ceremonial uniforms stood some of Britain's most highly trained soldiers, men who had faced real enemies in real combat and emerged victorious. The stage was set for a confrontation that would be captured on dozens of phones, shared millions of times across social media, and serve as a stark reminder that respect for tradition and authority wasn't just about politeness. It was about recognizing the very real consequences of crossing certain lines. As Marcus took His final steps toward the barrier? Samuel Richards prepared to demonstrate exactly what happened when someone mistook ceremony for weakness, when they confused tradition with vulnerability, and when they assumed that a guard's stillness meant he was powerless to respond to genuine threats. The metal barrier that separated Marcus from guard Samuel Richards might as well have been made of paper, for all the respect it commanded from the intoxicated construction worker. Years of resentment toward what he saw as an outdated system of privilege had been brewing inside him, and the alcohol had stripped away whatever inhibitions might have kept those feelings in check. Marcus stepped over the barrier with surprising agility for someone in his condition. The gasps from nearby tourists created a ripple of awareness through the crowd, as phones were quickly raised to capture what was clearly about to become an extraordinary moment. Some visitors backed away instinctively, sensing that they were about to witness something that would go far beyond the typical tourist experience. Samuel Richards felt the change immediately. His training had taught him to distinguish between harmless attention-seeking behavior and genuine security threats. The moment Marcus crossed that barrier, he had moved from being an annoying distraction to becoming a potential danger to the crown, to the public, and to the integrity of one of Britain's most sacred traditions. The guard's body remained perfectly still, but every muscle was now coiled and ready for action. His mind shifted into combat mode, the same mental state that had kept him alive through multiple deployments in hostile territory. The ceremonial aspects of his role faded into the background as the soldier underneath the uniform prepared to emerge. Marcus approached within arm's reach of the guard, his face flushed with alcohol and anger. He began shouting directly at Samuel, his words slurring together as he questioned the guard's manhood, his intelligence, and his worth as a human being. The verbal assault was designed to humiliate, to strip away the dignity that the uniform represented, and to prove that these symbols of British tradition were nothing more than overpaid actors. Other guards positioned around the courtyard had noticed the disturbance but maintained their positions according to protocol. They trusted Samuel to handle the situation appropriately, while remaining ready to assist if needed. This wasn't the first time someone had crossed the line, and it wouldn't be the last, but each incident required careful judgment about when and how to respond. The crowd had grown silent except for the clicking of camera shutters and the quiet whirring of video recording. Everyone seemed to understand that they were witnessing something significant, something that would likely be replayed and analyzed countless times in the hours and days to come. Marcus raised his hand and pointed directly at Samuel's face, his finger coming within inches of touching the guard's nose. The gesture was clearly meant to provoke a reaction, to force the soldier to break character and acknowledge his presence. When that failed to produce the desired response, Marcus decided to escalate further. The construction worker's frustration reached its peak as he realized that even his most aggressive verbal attacks were being met with complete silence. In his alcohol-impaired reasoning, he convinced himself that the only way to prove his point was through physical action. The guard's refusal to engage was seen not as professional discipline but as weakness that needed to be exposed. Samuel could smell the alcohol on Marcus's breath, could see the glassy look in his eyes that indicated significantly impaired judgment. Part of the guard's training involved recognizing when someone was beyond reasoning, when words would be useless and only decisive action would resolve a dangerous situation. The moment arrived with stunning suddenness. Marcus pulled back his right arm and threw a punch directly at Samuel's jaw. The blow connected with enough force to rock the guard's head backward, and would have been sufficient to knock down an ordinary civilian. The sound of knuckles meeting flesh echoed across the courtyard, followed immediately by a collective gasp from the assembled tourists. But Samuel Richards was not an ordinary civilian. He was a combat veteran who had been trained to absorb punishment and continue fighting. The punch that Marcus thought would humiliate the guard instead triggered a response that the construction worker was completely unprepared for. The guard's reaction was instantaneous and devastating. Years of military training, months of specialized instruction in crowd control, and countless hours of physical conditioning combined into a perfectly executed defensive response. Samuel's hand shot out with lightning speed, grabbing Marcus by the throat and lifting him clear off the ground. The transformation was remarkable to witness. The still, silent figure that had stood motionless for nearly an hour suddenly became a dynamic force of controlled violence. Every movement was precise, economical, and designed for maximum effectiveness. This wasn't random aggression, it was the calculated response of a professional warrior defending his post. Marcus found himself suspended in the air, his feet dangling helplessly as the guard's iron grip tightened around his windpipe. The alcohol-induced confidence that had driven him to this moment evaporated instantly, replaced by genuine fear as he realized the magnitude of his miscalculation. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the scene unfolded before them. Many continued, recording, understanding that they were capturing something extraordinary, while others simply stood frozen in amazement at the speed and efficiency of the guard's response. Samuel's eyes had changed completely. Gone was any hint of the ceremonial figure he had been moments before. In his place stood a soldier who had been pushed beyond his considerable tolerance and was now responding with the full weight of his training and authority. The bearskin hat remained perfectly positioned on his head, and his red tunic showed. No signs of disturbance, but the man wearing them had been transformed entirely. The iron grip around Marcus Thompson's throat tightened as Guard Samuel Richards demonstrated exactly why the Queen's Guard commanded respect from military units around the world. The construction worker's feet kicked helplessly in the air as he clawed at the soldier's wrist, his earlier bravado replaced by desperate gasps for breath. Samuel's voice, when it finally came, was low and controlled, carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "You will step back immediately, or I will consider you a threat to Her Majesty's safety." The words were delivered with ice-cold precision, each syllable carefully measured to convey the gravity of Marcus's situation. The crowd of tourists stood transfixed by the sudden transformation they were witnessing. Cameras continued to roll, as people struggled to process what they were seeing. The motionless ceremonial figure they had been photographing moments earlier had become something entirely different, a trained killer demonstrating why his position was earned rather than merely decorative. Marcus tried to speak, tried to apologize, tried to explain that it had all been a mistake, but the pressure on his windpipe made coherent speech impossible. His face was turning red as panic set in, the reality of his situation cutting through the alcohol haze like a knife. This wasn't the reaction he had expected, wasn't the embarrassed retreat or angry outburst he had hoped to provoke. Other guards around the courtyard remained at their posts, but had shifted subtly, their attention now focused on the developing situation. They trusted Samuel's judgment completely, knowing that his years of combat experience made him uniquely qualified to assess and respond to threats. Their stillness now carried a different quality, the predatory patience of hunters, ready to spring into action if needed. Samuel lifted Marcus higher, bringing the man's face level with his own. The guard's eyes were completely emotionless, displaying the same cold calculation he had used when facing Taliban fighters in the mountains of Afghanistan. "I am authorized to use whatever force necessary to protect this facility and these people," he continued, his voice never rising above a conversational level. "Do you understand me?" The construction worker managed a frantic nod, his hands still clutching desperately at the guard's wrist. Tears had begun streaming down his face as the combination of physical discomfort and genuine terror overwhelmed him completely. The tough guy persona he had worn like armor since arriving in London had cracked and fallen away, revealing the frightened man underneath. A child in the crowd began to cry, overwhelmed by the tension and violence of the scene. Her mother quickly covered her eyes and began backing away, but like most of the assembled tourists, she remained riveted by the demonstration of power playing out before them. This was history in the making, a moment that would be remembered and discussed for years to come. Samuel's grip loosened slightly, allowing Marcus to draw a ragged breath, but the guard's other hand had moved to his ceremonial sword, his fingers resting on the hilt in a gesture that was both subtle and unmistakably threatening. The message was clear. The chokehold was merely the beginning of what could happen if the situation continued to escalate. "These uniforms are not costumes," Samuel said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent courtyard. "We are soldiers of the Crown, and we have sworn an oath to defend Her Majesty and her realm against all enemies, foreign and domestic. You have made yourself an enemy today." Marcus's legs had gone completely limp as the fight drained out of him entirely. The alcohol that had given him courage now made everything seem surreal and nightmarish. He wanted to apologize, wanted to explain that he wasn't really an enemy, that he was just drunk and stupid and angry about things that had nothing to do with the guard or the monarchy. The demonstration was having its intended effect on the crowd as well. Conversations had stopped completely, replaced by hushed whispers and nervous glances. Many tourists were beginning to understand that they had fundamentally misunderstood what they were witnessing when they watched the changing of the guard ceremony. These weren't actors or performers, they were active-duty military personnel carrying out one of their nation's most important duties. Samuel slowly lowered Marcus back to the ground, but maintained his grip on the man's throat. The construction worker's legs buckled momentarily as his feet touched the cobblestones, his body trembling with the after-effects of adrenaline and fear. The guard's expression remained completely unchanged, as if lifting a grown man off the ground required no more effort than picking up a newspaper. "You will now walk backward to the barrier," Samuel commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument or negotiation. "You will not turn away from me. You will keep your hands visible at all times. If you make any sudden movements, if you reach for anything, if you do anything other than exactly what I have told you to do, I will assume you are reaching for a weapon, and I will respond accordingly." The guard's words sent a chill through the crowd as people began to grasp the deadly seriousness of the situation. This wasn't a game or a tourist attraction that had gotten out of hand. This was a trained soldier treating a genuine security threat with the same protocols he would use in a war zone. Marcus nodded frantically, desperate to comply with whatever instructions would get him away from this terrifying figure. The guard released his grip slowly, ready to renew his hold at the first sign of trouble. The construction worker's hand went immediately to his throat, massaging the area where Samuel's fingers had left their mark. As Marcus began his backward journey toward the barrier, Samuel remained perfectly positioned to intercept him if he tried to run or make any other sudden moves. The guard's body language had changed completely from the ceremonial stillness of minutes before. Now he moved like a predator tracking wounded prey, every step calculated and purposeful. Marcus Thompson's backward retreat toward the barrier felt like the longest walk of his life. Each step was carefully measured under the unwavering gaze of guard Samuel Richards, whose presence loomed behind him like a dark promise of consequences, should he make another mistake. The construction worker's hands shook visibly as he fought to keep them in plain sight, terrified that any unexpected movement might trigger another demonstration of the soldier's capabilities. The crowd had begun to murmur quietly among themselves, processing what they had just witnessed. Many were still recording, understanding that they had captured something extraordinary, while others had put away their phones entirely, too shaken by the intensity of the confrontation to treat it as entertainment any longer. Samuel followed Marcus's retreat with the measured pace of a professional, his eyes never leaving his target. The guard's transformation back to his ceremonial role would come later. For now, he remained fully engaged as a soldier dealing with a security threat. His hand stayed near his weapon, and his body language continued to broadcast lethal readiness to anyone with the experience to recognize the signs. As Marcus reached the barrier, his legs nearly gave out from relief. The metal railing that he had so casually stepped over minutes earlier now seemed like the most important boundary in the world, separating him from the consequences of his actions. But Samuel wasn't finished with him yet. "Stop," the guard commanded as Marcus prepared to climb back over to the tourist side. The construction worker froze immediately, not daring to complete the movement without explicit permission. Samuel approached until he was close enough to speak quietly, ensuring that his words would be heard clearly without broadcasting them to the entire crowd. "You assaulted a member of Her Majesty's Guard while we were carrying out our duties," Samuel said, his voice carrying the weight of official authority. "That is a crime under British law, punishable by imprisonment. Do you understand the severity of what you have done?" Marcus nodded frantically, tears still streaming down his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice hoarse from the pressure that had been applied to his throat. "I didn't mean it. I was drunk. I'm really sorry." Samuel's expression remained unchanged. Your intentions are irrelevant. Your actions are what matter here. You chose to cross a security barrier, you chose to threaten a guard, and you chose to assault a representative of the crown. Each of those choices has consequences. The guard glanced briefly at the crowd, noting the dozens of phones that had captured every moment of the incident. You should also understand that your actions have been recorded by multiple sources. This footage will be used as evidence should legal proceedings become necessary. Marcus felt his stomach drop as the full implications of his situation began to sink in. Not only had he been humiliated in front of hundreds of people, but evidence of his assault on the guard was now in the hands of countless strangers who could share it with the world. His moment of drunken rebellion was about to become a permanent part of his life story. 2 Metropolitan Police officers had appeared at the edge of the crowd, drawn by reports of a disturbance at the palace. They moved through the tourists with practiced efficiency, their presence adding another layer of authority to an already tense situation. Samuel acknowledged their arrival with a subtle nod but continued his conversation with Marcus. However, the guard continued, I am prepared to show mercy if you demonstrate genuine understanding of what you have done wrong. The word mercy carried special weight coming from someone who had just demonstrated his capacity for violence. You will apologize publicly to me, to the crown I represent, and to these people whose peaceful visit you disrupted. Marcus looked around at the crowd of tourists who were watching him expectantly. Many of them had children with them, families who had come to London to see the sights and had instead witnessed a display of aggression and its consequences. The shame of his actions hit him with full force as he realized how his behavior had affected innocent people. I'm sorry, he began, his voice breaking with emotion. I'm sorry to you, to the Queen, to everyone here. I was drunk and stupid and angry about things that had nothing to do with any of you. I disrespected something that I should have respected, and I scared people who didn't deserve it. Samuel listened to the apology with the same impassive expression he had worn throughout the encounter. When Marcus finished speaking, the guard remained silent for several long moments, allowing the weight of the man's words to settle over the crowd. The police officers had reached the barrier and were speaking, quietly with other guards, getting their account of what had transpired. Their presence served as a reminder that this incident was far from over, that there would likely be official consequences beyond the immediate confrontation. Your apology is noted, Samuel finally said. Now you will leave these grounds immediately, and you will not return. If you are seen in the vicinity of any royal property in the future, you will be arrested without warning. Is this understood? Marcus nodded eagerly, desperate to escape the situation with whatever dignity he had left. Samuel stepped back slightly and gestured toward the barrier. You may go. The construction worker climbed back over the railing with, shaking hands, his movements carefully controlled to avoid any action that might be interpreted as threatening. Once he was safely on the tourist side, he began backing away from the area, not trusting himself to turn his back on the guard who had so thoroughly dominated him. Samuel watched Marcus retreat until he disappeared into the crowd of tourists, heading toward the palace gates. Only then did the guard begin his transformation back to his ceremonial role, his body gradually resuming the rigid posture that had been interrupted by the assault. The crowd slowly began to disperse, but many tourists lingered, still processing what they had witnessed. Conversations buzzed with excitement and nervous energy as people shared their recordings and tried to make sense of what they had seen. For many, their understanding of the Queen's Guard had been fundamentally changed by witnessing the reality behind the ceremony. Within hours of the confrontation, videos of Marcus Thompson's encounter with Guard Samuel Richards began spreading across social media platforms like wildfire. The footage, captured from multiple angles by dozens of tourists, showed every detail of the incident with crystal clarity. The hashtag #RoyalGuardJustice began trending on Twitter as millions of viewers watched the construction workers' humiliation unfold. Marcus himself had fled London immediately after the incident, driving back to Birmingham in a state of shock and shame. The alcohol had worn off completely, leaving him with nothing but the stark reality of what he had done and the consequences that were sure to follow. His phone buzzed constantly with notifications as friends and family members discovered the viral videos and began calling for explanations. The story was picked up by major news outlets within 6 hours of the incident. British tabloids led with headlines like, "Don't mess with the guards" and "Royal knockout," while international media focused on the demonstration of British military discipline. Television news programs ran the footage repeatedly, often accompanied by expert commentary about the role and training of the Queen's Guard. Samuel Richards had returned to his ceremonial duties immediately after the police finished taking statements. His commanding officers praised his restraint and professionalism in handling the situation, noting that he had used exactly the appropriate level of force necessary to neutralize the threat without causing serious injury to the assailant. The incident sparked widespread debate about respect for tradition, the consequences of public intoxication, and the real nature of ceremonial military roles. Many viewers expressed satisfaction at seeing what they perceived as justice for disrespectful behavior, while others questioned whether the guards' response had been excessive for what amounted to a drunken mistake. Military veterans flooded social media with explanations of why the guards' actions were not only justified but necessary. They pointed out that the Queen's Guard are active duty soldiers who have served in combat zones around the world, not actors hired to entertain tourists. The ceremonial nature of their duties in no way diminished their capability or authority to deal with genuine threats. Marcus's employer in Birmingham learned about the incident when a co-worker showed him the viral video during lunch break. The construction company's management was horrified to see their employee involved in such a public disgrace, particularly one that reflected poorly on British working-class values of respect and decency. Back at Buckingham Palace, tour guides found themselves fielding countless questions from visitors who had seen the footage online. Many tourists approached the guards with notably more respect than usual, having gained a new understanding of who they were dealing with. The incident had inadvertently served as the most effective public education campaign about the Queen's Guard in decades. Social media analysis revealed that the video had been shared over 2 million times within the first 24 hours, with viewers from around the world commenting on the professionalism displayed by Samuel Richards. Many international observers expressed admiration for the way British military tradition had been upheld and defended. Marcus's family was devastated by the negative attention the incident brought to their name. His sister's wedding, which had been the original reason for his trip to London, was overshadowed by the scandal. Wedding guests spent more time discussing Marcus's viral humiliation than celebrating the bride and groom, turning what should have been a joyous occasion into a source of family shame. The legal consequences began to unfold slowly, but inexorably. The Metropolitan Police reviewed the evidence and concluded that Marcus had indeed committed assault against a member of the Queen's Guard while they were carrying out their official duties. A warrant was issued for his arrest, and officers traveled to Birmingham to take him into custody at his home. The arrest was covered extensively by local Birmingham media, adding another layer of humiliation to Marcus's situation. His neighbors, many of whom had seen the viral videos, gathered to watch as he was led away in handcuffs. The man who had sought to challenge authority and prove his worth had instead become a cautionary tale about the consequences of poor judgment. Samuel Richards, meanwhile, continued his duties with the same professionalism he had always displayed. He declined all media requests for interviews, understanding that his role required him to remain above the controversy his actions had created. The Guard's superiors made it clear that he had performed his duties exemplarily and had nothing to apologize for. Online commentators began analyzing every aspect of the confrontation, breaking down Samuel's technique and praising his restraint. Military training instructors used the footage as an example of textbook crowd control, showing how a trained professional could neutralize a threat quickly and efficiently without escalating to unnecessary violence. The incident also sparked renewed interest in the history and traditions of the Queen's Guard. Tourism officials reported increased visitor numbers at royal properties as people sought to see the famous guards for themselves, armed with new respect for the men behind the ceremonial uniforms. Marcus's friends from the engagement party expressed shock and embarrassment at their association with the incident. Several had tried to restrain him before he crossed the barrier, but their efforts had been ineffective against his alcohol-fueled determination. They found themselves fielding questions from reporters and dealing with their own minor celebrity as witnesses to the viral confrontation. The story took on international dimensions as foreign military units shared their own experiences with disrespectful tourists and inappropriate public behavior. The incident became a rallying point for discussions about the importance of respecting military traditions and the people who serve to uphold them. As the days passed, it became clear that Marcus Thompson's moment of drunken aggression had consequences far beyond anything he could have imagined. His actions had not only resulted in his own humiliation and legal troubles, but it also sparked a global conversation about respect, tradition, and the reality behind ceremonial roles that millions of people had previously misunderstood. 6 months after the incident that made him internationally infamous, Marcus Thompson sat in a Birmingham courtroom awaiting sentencing for assault against a member of the Queen's Guard. The viral video that had destroyed his reputation played one final time on the courtroom screens as the judge reviewed the evidence that had brought him to this moment. The legal proceedings had been swift and decisive. Marcus's guilty plea had avoided the need for a lengthy trial, but it had also meant accepting full responsibility for his actions without any mitigating circumstances. His lawyer had argued for leniency based on his client's intoxication and previously clean criminal record, but the prosecutor had successfully argued that the assault on a guard carrying out official duties demanded serious consequences. Judge Patricia Whitmore delivered the sentence with the same gravity that Samuel Richards had shown during the original confrontation. Marcus was sentenced to 6 months in prison, followed by 2 years of probation and a lifetime ban from all royal properties. The judge's comments reflected the seriousness with which the British legal system viewed attacks on ceremonial military personnel. The Queen's Guard represents the very foundation of our constitutional monarchy and military tradition, Judge Whitmore stated. An assault on these guardsmen is an assault on the institution they represent and on the values they embody. The court must send a clear message that such behavior will face the full weight of the law. Marcus's life had been completely transformed by those few minutes of poor judgment outside Buckingham Palace. His construction job was gone, lost within days of his employer learning about the incident. His reputation in Birmingham was permanently tarnished, with the viral video following him wherever he went. Even casual social interactions became difficult as people recognized him from the footage that continued to circulate online. Samuel Richards, in contrast, had received commendation from his superiors and had been selected for promotion within his regiment. His handling of the incident had become a case study in military academies, demonstrating the perfect balance of restraint and decisive action that exemplified British military professionalism. The Guard's actions had also led to changes in security protocols at royal properties. Additional barriers were installed to make it more difficult for intoxicated or confused tourists to accidentally breach security perimeters. Warning signs were posted in multiple languages, making it clear that the Guards were active military personnel authorized to use force against anyone who threatened them or the properties they protected. The incident had become legendary within military circles, with Samuel's technique being analyzed and praised by professional soldiers around the world. The footage was used in training programs to show how quickly a situation could escalate and how important it was to maintain discipline under pressure while being prepared to respond with appropriate force when necessary. Marcus's family continued to deal with the aftermath of his actions. His sister's marriage had survived the scandal, but the stress of constant media attention and public embarrassment had taken its toll. Family gatherings became uncomfortable affairs, with Marcus's presence serving as a constant reminder of the shame he had brought upon the family name. The construction worker had attempted several times to find new employment, but his viral infamy made it nearly impossible. Potential employers would recognize his name or face from the countless news reports and social media posts about the incident. His assault conviction made the situation even worse, creating legal barriers to many types of employment. During his time in prison, Marcus was forced to confront the full consequences of his actions. Fellow inmates were well aware of his story, and he found little sympathy for his situation. Many viewed his assault on a serviceman as particularly contemptible, regardless of the circumstances that had led to it. The incident had also sparked lasting changes in public behavior around royal properties. Tourist guides reported that visitors approached the guards with notably more respect and caution than before the viral video. Parents used Marcus's story to teach their children about the importance of respecting authority and understanding consequences. Samuel Richards eventually left his position with the Queen's Guard after completing his assigned tour of duty. He returned to active military service with his regiment, where his reputation as a disciplined professional had been enhanced rather than damaged by the incident. His career prospects had actually improved as a result of the global recognition of his professionalism under pressure. The video continued to resurface periodically on social media, usually accompanied by discussions about respect for military service and the consequences of public intoxication. It had become one of those internet classics that defined a particular moment and continued to influence behavior long after the original incident had occurred. Marcus was eventually released from prison after serving his full sentence, but his prospects remained bleak. The viral nature of his humiliation meant that his story would never truly be forgotten. Job applications, housing searches, and even casual social interactions were all complicated by his status as the man who had foolishly attacked a Queen's Guard. Years later, the incident remained a powerful reminder of how quickly poor judgment could destroy a life. Marcus Thompson had sought to prove something about himself and his place in society, but instead had demonstrated only his own lack of wisdom and respect. His moment of drunken rebellion had cost him his freedom, his reputation, his career, and his future prospects. Samuel Richards, meanwhile, continued his military career with distinction, eventually retiring with honors after decades of faithful service. The incident at Buckingham Palace had become just one moment in a long and distinguished career, but it had perfectly encapsulated the professionalism and dedication that had made him an exemplary soldier. The lasting legacy of the confrontation was a renewed public understanding of what the Queen's Guard truly represented. Behind the ceremonial uniforms and tourist attractions stood real soldiers with real training and real authority. Marcus Thompson's brutal lesson had become everyone's education about the importance of respecting traditions that had endured for centuries and the people dedicated to preserving them.